What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here with a mock offseason. Yes, that is right. We're back with a mock offseason, our first of the 2023 NFL offseason. Is that right? I mean, it's 2020. Is it 2023? It's 2023. I'm sorry, I got my years messed up. That's right. We're here with Mock Offseason 1.0, where we go through free agency and the draft for the Detroit Lions and put together a roster for this upcoming season. Now, a couple of disclaimers. First off, this is definitely not going to be perfect in terms of the type of deals that I'm giving out here, because for a lot of these, I don't know what deals they're going to get. I don't know what some of these players are absolutely going to be looking for in free agency, but they are players that maybe fill needs of the Lions. I'm going to try to explain them and make sense of them. With that being said, I'm not going to go into the smallest little details of these signings because it would just take too long, and that's boring. How much guaranteed dollars I gave from this season versus next, like, no one's going to care about the little things like that. So I'm going to focus on the main thing that you guys are going to care about to try to not make this video super long. But yes, as I said, this includes both free agency and the draft for the Detroit Lions, as well as some UDFA suggestions. Now, I'm not going to go too far into that. I think we can get deeper into that as I continue to learn more about these draft prospects. I went through a lot of draft prospects to make this video happen, but I stuck to some of the Brad Holmes philosophy. See, in the past, we try to make it realistic. And while I'm still trying to do that, at the same time, I'm going to be following the Brad Holmes approach of draft the players that you love. And now, with these last 2 years of him moving the draft board, I said, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make trades in this mock offseason, but I got through it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make moves in the draft. I'm going to make trades. I'm going to get players that I love. And this will change as we go forward and do more of these, because there's going to be different players that I find that I really like. There's going to be different needs. Signings are going to happen by the Detroit Lions. So this is all going to change. But this is my first one. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm going out. I'm having fun with this. We're just going to make it happen. Now, again, a lot of these deals, I don't know exactly what these players are looking for. I tried to base them either one, if they had a projection, meaning if SpotTrack had a year-by-year average salary projection. So for certain players, let's say, for example, Evan Brown, his is set at $10.8 million per season. I'm going to use that number because that's one thing that I can actually look at. I don't want to change it and be like, well, I think it's only 3. I don't want to do that. So if there's an actual number projection that I was able to find out there, I'm using that. So with that, a guy like Evan Brown, as you're going to see, is going to be very difficult to bring back because of how high his number is set. Even if I don't necessarily believe he'll get paid that much per season, I'm going to follow what they have. Same thing, if Pro Football Focus put a projection out there, I'll use that projection when I sign the player. So with that being said, I don't know. Let's just dive right into it. Then I'll give you an example of kind of what a Final 53 could look like. But again, that's not exact because, you're going to have UDFAs that you sign. You're going to have guys that pop up during the offseason that you can pick up and sign. And, I don't know if all these players that I have on here in terms of signings are actually going to be available to the Detroit Lions. Who knows? They could get re-signed by their own team. I try not to include like exclusive rights free agents because I know that one is super unlikely. There was a guy I liked in free agency for an offensive lineman, but he was an exclusive rights free agent. So I was like, I'm not going to do it. All right. So with that, let's go, because this is normally how it plays out. Yes, you can sign free agents after the draft, especially if they're guys that, either one are like, yeah, I'm waiting for this great deal to come out, like an Odell, or two, if it's a situation of maybe the guy's a little bit more under the radar, those kind of players you can actually sign after the draft. But for the most part, I wanted to go in here and hit free agency first. That way, when I went to the draft, I had an idea of what I needed, but also on top of that, it also made it difficult because I couldn't okay, I'm going to sign this guy, then hit the draft. Actually, I want to restart. I want to sign this guy. Like, I would try to make it realistic in that sense. Let's start with some of the cuts that I made. Let's start there. Let's start with the big ones. There are 3 big cuts that I made in this mock offseason. Again, I feel like the Lions go a lot of different ways, and I can do multiple mock offseasons where I do it differently. But for this mock offseason, here's the direction that I went with. Now, unfortunately, we definitely took on some dead cap with this mock offseason, and I don't love that. All right, I think for some of these, it'd be great to not have that. But the good thing is that it does accelerate some of that dead cap. So with some of these cuts, for example, I know the Jalen Ramsey rumor is going around and it's out there. And if the Lions want to make a move like that, cutting a player would not only help financially for this year for an addition like that, but it also would help for next year because you would accelerate maybe their void years or whatever that is. And you take on the dead cap now, yes, for now, but next year you don't have to deal with it. So it actually is beneficial because as this contract goes on, you have more money available for the upcoming seasons. But for this one, I did not make the Jalen Ramsey trade. I'm going to spoil that now. Instead, I cut Romeo Okwara. That's the first one here. We saved $7.5 million in cap cap space with $7 million in dead cap. He has a void year next season, so he's not technically under contract next year. Yes, he could be in line for an extension, but his dead cap is higher because of the fact that he has a void year next year, which if you keep him on the roster, you're going to have to pay that next season, even though he's not on the roster, even if you don't extend him. So while the dead cap is a little bit higher, I'm making this cut in this mock offseason. Like Romeo Okwara, I think he was worth the extension when we did it. I'm a fan of this guy, and if he can come back and be healthy and look like the guy that he looked like just in 2020, oh my goodness, this is a fantastic signing for the Lions, and I'm still good with rocking with him. But I am a little bit concerned after watching him back from this past year. He just did not look like himself athletically, and that definitely draws some concern with me here. With this scenario, it opens up cap space for this year with making this kind of cut, and also on top of that, again, it moves forward the void year, so I'm just taking that on now. So that's the first thing that I did with the guys like James Houston and the Josh Paschal. Like, I feel like we kind of know what the future core is of this defensive line. Aiden Hutchinson, Josh Paschal, James Houston is now part of that. He kind of just brought himself into that this past season. Also, you have the Aleem McNeils. Like, those four feel like the core pieces that you know are going to be part of the future here. And with that, with the James Houston emergence, I'm going to be cutting Romeo Okwara. I'm also cutting Michael Brockers. This one's probably not much of a shock here, and I'm sure any mock offseason that we did, I'd probably do the same thing. And that is because you save $10 million. Now, yes, there is a little bit of dead cap, $3.975 million. It's not like a crippling dead cap, but at the same time, it is a little bit. However, I'm saving $10 million. This one just seems like a no-brainer. It's something that I kind of just have to do. I want some cap space. The Lions are kind of middle of the pack right now, and I want to clear some up, and that's the easiest way for me to do that. So I appreciate Brockers and what he did as kind of the vet presence on the defensive line, but for now, I'm going to cut him. And then also Big V. This one I kind of hate the most, I'm going to be honest. Well, I don't like the Romeo one either. It's just unfortunate of his health. I don't like this one because of the fact that I feel like ideally the best scenario here for Big V is to negotiate potentially just a pay cut with the guy, because Big V may be in a situation, because of the fact that he's playing guard and because of his injury history, that he may actually still make more with the Lions while taking a pay cut than he would getting cut by the Lions and trying to go find a deal elsewhere. Like, he could actually potentially still be in a better situation, I think, with the Lions while restructuring a potential pay cut with the Lions. However, I don't know how I would do that, and I could try to project on it, but in this one, I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, so I don't love having his cap it be as high as it is. As you can see, $12.5 million for this upcoming year, and then also, I'll get to that later, but $12.5 million for this upcoming year, so I'm just going to go the route of cutting him. I don't like to do this. I would prefer to just maybe we get a little bit of a pay cut going here. All right, we keep him around. We know he didn't play this past year, but when he's on the field, he's reliable. He's a mover in the run game. He is a mauler at right guard, and I think that fits him a lot better at right guard. I know he's a little bit bigger, but he has the skills to sit down and pass protect for the Lions at right guard. So I hate that I have to do this, but for this scenario, I'm going to just be cutting him. And finally, we have Frank Ragnow, who I want to touch on here, who I am going to be restructuring his deal. I think if the Lions are going to go this route of restructuring someone's deal, I think Frank Ragnow makes the most sense. I brought this up in an earlier video. Reason being is the way you see his contract is set up, his cap number doesn't continuously get massive as it goes on. It actually takes a dip years down the road. He's one of these players that are under contract for multiple years. Because of that, I think giving him a restructure is fine, and I know that he's not going anywhere. I think he's one of the safer guys in terms of when you're restructuring a contract, you don't want to cut that player, because essentially what you're doing is just taking his base salary, converting that into signing bonus, which spreads out through his contract. That's how you save cap. So because of that, you don't want to do that to a player that you are not sure if he's going to be there next season, because then if you cut him, now that dead cap just accelerates all that bonus that you gave him, that you converted from his base salary. Now all of a sudden that turns into dead cap if you cut him. So I don't think he's going anywhere. He's young. He's under contract. I think his contract just makes sense. So because of that, I'm going to restructure his deal to the max here, which saves me almost $8 million in cap space. And as you can see, his base salary drops down to $8.5 million. Yes, his cap goes up for the next couple of years from $12.8 million to $15.4 million and $14 million to $16.6 million, basically 2.5 per year, right? So it goes up by basically $2.5 million, but that's not huge, especially considering the cap space is projected to continue to just rise every single year. So because of that, I'm going to restructure his deal, and that's the big financial moves that I make there to save money. Also included in these cuts, I did include Logan Stenberg and Quintez Cephas. I'm cutting Logan Stenberg and Cephas. They save me a little bit in cap space, not a ton. As you can see, there's not much dead cap. With Cephas, only $76K, and with Stenberg, it's only $185K. But after last season, Stenberg, there were situations where he could have stepped in for us, and the Lions chose to go other directions. I don't think that's a great look. So because of that, I'm going to be cutting Logan Stenberg, and then also Quintez Cephas. That's mainly a numbers thing, but it does save me a little bit of cap space. So those are the main cuts that we have. All right, so let's get into these signings and re-signings for the Detroit Lions. Now, I did go a little bit deeper this time around than I had in the past. Also, by the way, I accidentally deleted everything on this page, so I had to go back through and re-input the signings that I made in the re-signings. So hopefully nothing is off with that, but just to throw that out there really quickly, so things are going to look in a different order. The cap space may be a little bit different as well. But with that being said, I went back, re-put these in so that you guys could see what I was talking about. Number one, I try not to go super deep on a lot of these signings in terms of the details of like, okay, this is how much I backloaded the deal, or this is the little void year that I threw in there. I try not to go super deep into that, or here's the out in 2 years, because I didn't think that was super necessary for this type of video. There is flexibility with a lot of these deals. They could be extended. They could have more years than what I gave them, but the main thing that I was focused on with giving out these deals is making sure that my cap space, I had enough to take in the draft class that I ended up drafting, which you guys will see next. So I wanted to make sure I had that, and also a little bit left over as well, which I have in there, but I try not to focus too much on that. But it definitely leaves flexibility. Like the Lions wanted to add a little bit more. Yeah, in these scenarios, you could potentially extend the guy, backload a little bit, throw void years on, set it up a little bit differently, add an out to the deal. Like, I didn't really go into that much of detail, so where you see the guaranteed salary being like $0 for a lot of these guys, I didn't put a lot of guarantees in there because I didn't think it was super necessary for the video. There's going to be guarantees within these deals, but for the video, I didn't really think it was super necessary because we're just talking about for, this mock offseason. So with that, let's dive right into it, man. We're going to start off with John Kaminsky first. Kaminsky was a no-brainer. Now, I think, yeah, you can make a case you don't have to bring him back. Josh Paschal can play a similar type of role. He's kind of your 5-tech. I think he's the future. I think you kind of know what the future is, the core pieces of this defensive front. But I think for how much that he meant for the Lions last season, his pass rush when he came back and was healthy for us, his ability to still play stand-up as big as he is, where maybe that's not ideal against most opponents. There are certain teams where you like to have that bigger body out there to really help us shut down the run and contain the edge, and he was athletic enough to do that, to kick inside on third downs and still be beneficial when a team tries to run a draw, but also get pressure into stunt work. Like, I want to have this guy back. He wants to be back with the Lions. There is going to be interest level. The $3.5 million that I gave him, the cap number there, is based on last year where I saw guys at similar positions kind of get paid, and also what PFF was projecting. He's not one of their top, defensive linemen / edge rushers, so I felt like this was a fair number to put it at. I could be off on this one. Could be a little bit more he gets, or it could be a little bit less, but I went with $3.5 million. It felt like a good middle ground there. Then we have Josh. Oh, no, we don't. I'll get to that. I'm sorry. I forgot we changed this up. Okay. Also, we have our exclusive rights free agent signings. Now, remember, with exclusive rights deals, these have no guarantees. Instead, they are just basically the minimum, which is $940K according to Over the Cap, and it's getting them back. So if you want them, you have them back. They can't negotiate with anyone else, and there's no guarantees. So if you end up cutting these players, it's not going to hurt you in terms of dead cap along the way, which is nice because we already have a pretty good amount of dead cap that we're dealing with here. So Craig Reynolds, of course, he's involved. Let me just actually show all of them at once if I can. I'm going to show these first three. Craig Reynolds, I think Craig Reynolds has an opportunity to kind of show people, hey, don't forget about me. I feel like he was a little bit forgotten last year because of the time that he missed, and while athletically he's limited in certain areas, he's probably not the ideal third down back, even though he does have a big-time receiving background in college at D2. However, I thought his vision's outstanding. He was great for us in 2021 when he had to step in, and he's kind of one of those guys where Dan Campbell points to, like when the lights come on, when they put on the pads, they're different. He balled out for the Lions in 2021. It was massive for us, and it's just unfortunate we didn't get to see as much of him this past year, but Craig Reynolds, at least give him an opportunity, and I'm excited to see him in the preseason again, where he can kind of remind everybody, like, I'm that dude. As well as Tommy Kramer, this one is super necessary. So I'm just going to address the elephant right now, and that is that we did not re-sign Evan Brown. Now, again, this is because of the way I'm approaching this, as if they have projections, I'm rolling with those projections because it's so much guessing within these signings with most of these that if I can find projections on the deals, I'm just going to roll with those. And Spot Track, according to his age and his statistics, they're projecting he makes $10.8 million per season. Now, I, for one, do not think he gets paid that. That's like top tier starting guard level. I get his age. Yes, he's only played guard for one season, so you could argue that that makes a little bit of sense, but I still can't see him getting paid almost $11 million a season to play the guard position because I view him as more of a middling to below average offensive guard. We know how important and impactful he is for us, so yes, definitely I would make it one of my priorities to bring back Evan Brown. He's so darn necessary. But with that being said, because his projection is set at basically 11 a year, I couldn't find a way to pay him $11 million a season and make that make sense. So because of that, instead, I just decided to let him walk. The challenge of that is that I have to go out and try to find someone else rather than just giving him an easy deal and saying, there he is, there's our backup guard. So it was challenging. I had to find different names, but with that, also very unfortunate if that is the case. I mean, hey, look, if he wants to go get paid that, remember last year he took just over $2 million to come back and didn't even get in a restricted free agent tender. It was like, wait, why did he take that little of money? It felt like he was going to get an opportunity elsewhere last season. But after playing guard for us this past year for the most part, I could see him wanting to go get a nice little deal with somewhere else and have an opportunity to compete. You could try to re-sign Evan Brown and make him your starter, and I think he can compete for that position, and maybe because he's only played guard for really one season that he can improve in that area. But if you're paying him that much, you're paying him to be the starter. So in this case, I let him walk. I hate to do it, but in this mock offseason, that's how we had to kind of go with it. But Tommy Kramer, because it's essential, because we didn't really see him last year because he was out with injury, but he is an essential piece because if you remember last year when there was no Evan Brown, we know Big V missed a year, how important it would have been to have a guy like that can play both guard positions, that could cross-train at center. When we didn't have Evan Brown, it was a disaster trying to figure out who could play right guard. It was signing KO'd. It was Dan Skipper trying to play there. It was Logan Stenberg. It was a mess trying to figure out who could play this position. And if we would have had Tommy Kramer, it would have been huge for us, and you would have been a noticeable difference. But we didn't. So I'm glad we have him in the exclusive rights free agent position where we can get him back and let him compete this offseason. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Scott Daly's our long snapper. Unless we're trying to draft a new one, which I kind of hope we're not. Let's just not spend too much time with this one. Scott Daly's, of course, coming back. And then also Shane Zylstra. What's cool about Shane Zylstra is he feels like he's still kind of under the radar. Like, he's not your big-time blocking tight end, and I don't think he ever will be. But what he is the guy that every time they go to practice, he's the guy that stands out. Like last year when they had James Mitchell, but he wasn't practicing in OTAs because of his injury, and it was kind of Shane Zylstra's show without TJ Hawkinson. Zylstra took over. Like, he was the guy, and then you still kind of doubt him because you're like, oh no, we got other guys. But especially once we trade away Hawkinson, his valuable impact within the red zone, and just mainly being a receiving target, his reliability with Jared Goff to just catch everything thrown his way is really nice. I'm not saying he's guaranteed to make a spot next year, but he's young. He had his brother on the team for a little bit, and I think it's definitely worth bringing him back on that exclusive rights deal for sure. CJ Moore. Now, this is a little bit of a bump from what he was getting paid last season with the Lions. I gave him a 1-year, $2 million deal just to bump it up a little bit last year. Yeah, he's a depth signing for safety, but mainly he is a special teams impact player that had 2 fake punts last year that were both successful. He is one of the best special teams players in football. I think just that alone makes it like, okay, we want to get this guy back. And again, even going back to 2021 when he played a little bit at safety for us, I thought he was reliable. He showed his versatility. I like CJ Moore. He's a little bit undersized. He's a little bit limited at safety, but he's depth, and he's also a very good special teamer. So I'm bringing him back. He just feels like one of those guys that are going to be a Lion for a long time, and you're like, oh yeah, he's just a Lion, right? Brock Wright, exclusive rights free agent deal. Again, I don't think there's a guarantee that he's back on the roster here, but it doesn't have to be because he's an exclusive rights free agent, and because of what he's meant to us, I got to bring him back. He's not a great blocker, and I think that's the area where you would like to upgrade the most here, and because he's not a dynamic receiving threat, but he's reliable. He pretty much catches what's thrown to him, even though he's going to be very limited in the route running that you're going to put on his table. I would like to see him improve a little bit more as a blocker as a whole. But with that being said, I like Brock Wright and what he brings to us, so of course I'm bringing him back as an exclusive rights free agent. And also Jamal Williams, this is one we've talked about a lot. Like, okay, what guys have to be brought back? Jamal is kind of that. Now, this is one of those deals I did technically backload a little bit here because I gave him a 2-year deal. I thought about giving him a 1 year, but I gave him 2 year, mainly that way I could backload him, but also because next year we don't have a lot of guys under contract at running back, and in this case I actually think I cut Jamar Jefferson, so he could be a practice squad back. I like Jamal. And it could also be incentivizing to come back on a 2-year deal where he kind of feels like he's at home again, getting another 2-year deal. And I think it's worth giving it to him. I mean, he's only 28. Yeah, he'll be 30 at the time, and we can decide from there. But Jamal Williams is everything that you want at running back. He was everything that he was supposed to be when he signed here. He was the same running back that we expected to get. Obviously, his locker room presence and the energy that he gives, his pass protecting ability, and he's not a bad receiving target, even though he's kind of limited and he had some drops. He's very reliable in terms of he doesn't fumble, even though this past year we saw a couple pop up. Jamal's like a must. Now, his cap hit, I have it a little bit lower this year because I backloaded a tad, as his projected salary was $4.1 million per season, so I stuck with that, meaning I gave him him a little bit less this year, add a little bit more to that contract next season to make that number meet at 4.1. So it's like $4.5 million next year, $3.6 million this season in terms of cap hit, just to open up a little bit of cap space for Jamal Williams. But yeah, I want to have this guy back. He's a no-brainer. Jamal's coming back. It's just, how many years is it? And for me, it's 2 years in this scenario. All right, now, oh, no, we're still staying with re-signings. Will Harris. Everybody's like, what? Will Harris? Look, if y'all know me, y'all know I like Will Harris. I'm a big fan of the dude, all right? You know I like Will Harris. Kick in the slot. You'll see how it plays out within the whole roster here. This isn't a big-time deal, and I'm assuming there's going to be a pretty good out. Maybe you give some guarantees here to bring him back. I'm not sure. I don't know how much interest he's going to draw in the open market, but with that, I really like him. So to get him on this kind of deal that's not super expensive in terms of he's very smart on the outside. He's a very good communicator, even from the slot as well. He's a willing tackler. He improved, honestly, because he's never really been a full-time corner. I think we finally kind of found a spot for him. He could also potentially be a special teams impact player. If he plays less on defense, I could see him being a special teams impact player for sure. But with that, like, if you just go back and look at the early games, like Washington, when he was on the outside, he looked fine on the outside. Like, he looked really solid for the Lions. I don't want him as a starter, but I love him for depth. Will Harris is a must-bring back, in my opinion. Justin Jackson. This one I wasn't sure, all right? I went back and forth because I was like, do I go get someone else? Actually, the main guy that I was considering was Myles Gaskin, who is the back for the Miami Dolphins. Well, he was, and now he's probably going to be let go because this past year he didn't really play, but he's more of a receiving back. So I really considered not bringing back Justin Jackson and trying to go get a guy like Gaskin, because he's more of the receiving third down threat. And I don't think Justin Jackson is a ton of that. But in fairness to Jackson, what he is he was a capable kind of change of pace back that brought some explosiveness and twitch to the back room. We didn't have Swift. And on top of that, he also was a very good kick returner. He averaged almost 27 yards per kick return. So even though that value has kind of diminished a little bit in today's NFL, I still love that he brought that to the table. I'm going to bring him back on a cheap deal, a little bit over the minimum, $1.5 million for Justin Jackson. And then we have Nate Sudfeld. Now, people probably hate seeing this. Oh, Nate Sudfeld, why would you do that? Well, here was my thing. I didn't want to be pigeonholed when I hit the draft in terms of saying, I got to draft a quarterback because I don't have a backup. I didn't want to be there. Looking at the free agent market, really no one stood out, and I liked Sudfeld. I liked what I saw from his film back last year when he was with the Niners in the preseason. Now we're getting into deals outside of Detroit. Now, I don't want to spend too much time because I know this is already taking a while, but these type of deals are the Brad Holmes types of deals to me. These are the prove it deals that we're giving out here. He just hasn't worked before. Maybe they have injuries in the past, whatever it may be. These are opportunities for the guy to come in, prove himself with us, and then maybe he goes elsewhere. Maybe he sticks with us. I'm not sure. And we're going to start that off with Hassan Ridgeway. Hassan Ridgeway has bounced around a little bit. He's a little bit of the older, prove it deals that I'm giving out here. And mainly coming out of college as a former 4th-round pick, his biggest concerns were conditioning and health. And unfortunately, health has been something that has popped up with Hassan Ridgeway. Last season, he didn't finish the season for them, but he's been a guy that's played in that wide 9 front with Philly and also with San Francisco most recently when he was picked up on a one-year deal by San Francisco. And he had to step in because of injuries to guys like Arik Armstead. But this is a player that athletically is very gifted. I mean, he just has a fantastic build. 6'3", 300 pounds. He is rocked up for a defensive tackle. He's got explosive first step that he transitions into very good power. He plays behind the line of scrimmage. He can play behind the line of scrimmage, and he can play nose tackle for you, as well as probably play a little bit of 3-tech as well. He kind of could do both there, and it was similar to kind of what we saw last year for the Lions, that he did a little bit with San Fran, but of course it was a little bit more of an attacking front style to that. He's the balanced athlete. It just hasn't really all come together for him. But with that being said, I'm so intrigued when I watched him about the potential here. I still am. I know he's 29, so that's why it's a prove it deal, but I'm still very intrigued, okay? I thought the awareness was kind of hit and miss, but for the Lions, we can use an attacking style defensive tackle here, and what I've liked is I've seen a lot from Brad Holmes last few years. Usually it seems like when he gives out prove it deals, it's to a position that needs some depth, needs some help, needs to get better during the offseason, but on top of that, it also allows him some flexibility in the draft, and I think Ridgeway does just that. So I don't think this is a lock to make the team, but I think it's a really nice upside signing for the Lions for a cheap $1.8 million deal, which is kind of based on what he just got paid, and then also his stock may have actually went down a little bit after this last year. So I think that's actually a fair price point for him. He could get a little bit more. We'll see. Eddie Pinheiro, or Pinheiro. I don't actually know how to pronounce the dude's name. I feel bad. But this is the kicker from the Carolina Panthers. Now, This, again, we're doing free agency first, so I wanted to make sure I have a kicker. I didn't want to bring back Michael Badgley necessarily, and I feel like Eddie might be the best option that's available. I'm signing him in this scenario to a 2-year, $4 million deal, which is kind of in line with what Greg Zuerlein got this past season, I think, with the Dallas Cowboys, and I just wanted to make sure that I had a kicker. I would love if you got me a little bit more range. Obviously, I love the Jake Moody idea out of Michigan. According to PFF Simulator, which I used, he actually would be undrafted, so I guess technically I could just sign him. Eddie is a guy that's only 27 years old. This past season, he was great for Carolina when they asked upon him. 33 of 35 with 54-yard long field goal. But with that being said, if you look at him career-wise, he's 5 for 5 on 50-plus yard field goals, and he's 19 of 24 on 40 to 49-yard field goals. That's outstanding. His percentage is incredible. 64 for 71 in his career. He also was 66 for 71 in extra points, and on top of that, he is a guy that takes on kickoff responsibilities. I think this is a nice deal. I think 1 or 2 years is fine here. Whichever one you kind of want to go with is fine. With his youth, I think 2 years is cool. You can do that as well. But yeah, I think this gives us an improvement at kicker, and we needed that. So that's the direction that I went here. Continuing, and you know there's always a lot of available kickers that you can try to pick up on. Continuing, we have David Long. Won't spend a ton of time with this one. This is not the linebacker in the Titans. This is the cornerback from the LA Rams. Again, kind of to the point I just made about Ridgeway. If there's a position which I think we can improve upon, giving out a prove-it deal is fine to that position group, and then I can add to that more in the draft. That's kind of what I did here with David Long. Now, David Long, obviously, he was drafted when Brad Holmes was with the LA Rams. He came out of Michigan as a somewhat undersized, 5'11", sub-200-pound cornerback that was feisty in the press, and that's kind of where he lived at Michigan, because that's what Michigan does. They man press. So systematically, I think he fits. Now, with LA, he's played a lot more off coverage. He's kind of had to develop that because of his, ability against bigger receivers can give him problems. So he's kind of had to develop within that area. And I don't think athletically he's the most gifted player that you see out there. I think he's a little bit limited. But he also has slot experience as well. So there is some potential flexibility. And I don't think the LA Rams are going to bring him back because they have so much depth at cornerback. And he kind of lost his role. I mean, you had a year in 2021 where he's playing over 500 snaps. This past year, it's like down to 200. He just lost his role. So for me, I mean, they would probably love to have him back if they moved Jalen Ramsey, but this is a prove-it deal. It's $2.2 million. It's basically falling in line exactly to the Mike Hughes deal that we gave out this past season. I actually feel like I may have overpaid a little bit for that, and I would be willing to go less, of course. But flexibility, opportunity, because you're going against a lot of young guys out here, and I think it can fit him stylistically. So, boom, David Long, you are a Lion. At least for this season, potentially. Continuing on, another prove-it deal. Chat, I love giving out prove-it deals. I said chat. I love giving out prove-it deals, man. It's so much fun. Drew Sample. I'm actually super pumped about this one. Because when you look at the tight end market, I consider draft, consider free agency. How much am I willing to spend? I don't think the Lions are going to throw a lot of money at a tight end. I just don't think it's how they're building this team, and I think that's fine. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't think they will. So in that scenario, when I looked at a guy like Drew Sample, he was so fascinating because this is a former second-round pick out of Washington, 6'5", 255, great size, and he can block. This is a upgrade, I believe, as a run blocker and pass protector from Brock Wright and Shane Zylstra. And what I think that does is it could potentially complement a guy like James Mitchell, who gives me more of the Everett vibes when he was with the LA Rams, kind of the run after catch ability, more receiving target, kind of rack type of tight end. He, I think, complements that well. He's not a big time receiving target. He's more kind of like your underneath chip, flat spot route type of tight end. But he also is a very reliable hands as well. Like he snags some of those things, and he's a good blocker. So this, to me, I consider multiple year deal. I don't like that. If I can get him 1 year, $1.5 million, where he basically just fell out of a role. I mean, he hasn't put up any type of receiving production outside of one season with Cincinnati. And the reason for that is, I think, because of also how they play their offense. Like, they've added guys that kind of replaced him as more of the receiving threats downfield. But at the same time, it's also how they play their offense in terms of the year that he put up production, which was 2020, where he had 40 receptions for 350 yards, basically receiving there. They used a lot more 3 tight end sets, okay? And there was a lot more underneath usage for him, and he's just stopped being utilized there. And he's also coming off of an injury. If you look at him, he's only had 18 receptions in the other 3 seasons outside of 2020. And for me, I think that's a good opportunity to prove it, see what he can be, and fit in an offense that isn't going to be asking a ton of you as a receiving target. his size is great, but they're going to ask you to block, and I think he can bring that value. There's also guys I liked in the draft for that as well, but Sample is just such an intriguing option in free agency. I'm just going to go for it and bring him in on a prove it deal. This is one of the bigger deals I actually gave out, which is Nate Airbig. I struggle with this one. I wasn't sure where to go with this one, and I don't know if I feel like I love this, but I kind of like it, okay? It was one of my bigger deals I gave out. I settled on a 2-year, $6.7 million deal. Wasn't sure what price range to go there because I think he's going to have interest this offseason. Here's the deal with Nate. Nate was an offensive guard for the Philadelphia Eagles that was given a restricted free agent tender this past season, and unfortunately they cut him, and apparently it was their agent reached out to the team. He wanted him to be released because he wasn't getting an opportunity to potentially start. Now here I think he'll get that potential opportunity because I cut Big V. Doesn't mean he will, but he could get that opportunity on paper. He was then claimed by the New York Jets. What I like about Nate Airbig is this. First off, he's young. He's from Stanford. He is a blocker that will move you. He has some of that tough demeanor, which I think fits well for the Lions, and you saw it when he played the Lions this past year with the New York Jets. He just kind of has some of that to him. He's also a pretty good athlete as well. And for a guy at his size, he's been able to plug in at different offensive line positions. Kelsey really gave a lot of love when the Philadelphia Eagles released this guy because he just felt like, man, he's young, he's improving, and he just means so much to this offense. He's smart, but he's able to play right guard, left guard, and he's even plugged at center. And when he's plugged at center, he's actually held his own, which is weird because he shouldn't be able to for a guy this size. So I felt like, one, I was getting flexibility, which is so necessary, and even Kelsey on this. You have to give flexibility if you're a backup lineman because there's only going to address so many. So I can't have a backup right guard, backup center, backup left guard, backup right tackle. Like, I can't have all that. So I need a guy with flexibility. Nate Airbig is that. He's young. It feels similarly to kind of when we brought in Evan Brown, but a little bit less because Brown was completely unknown. This guy's not completely unknown, even though he is a former undrafted free agent. To me, is going to draw some interest. So I would love to bring back Evan Brown, but again, that number was set at $10.8 million, so I couldn't do that. So I'm going Nate Airbig here for a 2-year deal because, one, we cannot go down this road again like we did last year of when we don't have our right guard, we're just incomplete. I don't know who to go to, and we're trying to put everybody there. We can't have that. Number 2, he can compete for the starting guard position because he's played like a starting caliber guard, right? He's played like that. So he can play for that position for the Lions, and he can compete there if I go add someone in the draft, which we'll see. And if he doesn't, he has flexibility to bounce around, and I think that's a great signing for the Lions. So I was willing to spend a little bit more here because of that fact that I don't want to go through what we did last year, and not having Evan Brown is a very tough loss. I need to make sure we fix that because, again, the number one thing that helps Jared Goff is offensive line. Everything else is great, but you got to pass protect, and I think that he can bring some of that, even though his background is mainly being a really dominant run blocker. And then I'm going to finish it off, and I'm not going to finish it off, but we're close to finishing off. I'm going to go sign Billy Turner. I don't know if I love this one. I went through a lot of tackles, whether it was Cameron Fleming, who's also on his team, whether it was, even going down a list of Cleveland Browns. They have a guy over there that kind of intrigued me a little bit. His name is slipping my mind right now. He's like 32 years old, and he just hasn't played much because he continues to have injuries over and over and over. So I was like, I don't know if I love that one. And he hasn't been great because he's kind of built as a tackle, yet he slides in the guard, which limits him as a run blocker because he's under 300 pounds. But Billy Turner, on the other hand, we know he was a starter for a while there with Green Bay. This past year, he landed with Denver, and he kind of mixed in with Cameron Fleming when he got back and healthy. Billy Turner is limited in some sense, but at the same time, he is a right tackle, and he can be your backup right tackle that has swing potential because he has very quick feet off the line of scrimmage. He can get on you in short sets. I don't like how he pops up from time to time. He's not a bad run blocker. He's a smart player that can handle it. He can hold it down. Now, he also is coming off of an injury. I believe he's coming off of a knee injury. I wanted to add a backup tackle. I wanted to do this last year. I think we have more flexibility this year to say, let's go do that. But at the same time, I didn't necessarily want to count out the potential of a guy like Obina Eze potentially winning that role for the Lions. So this is the toughest thing with that one because I would have liked to probably get a cheaper deal here. I went $2.5 million, which is basically the deal he got. However, I consider giving him less because Billy Turner may have hurt his stock a little bit last year, and he hasn't had a ton of suitors, even though the fact that he's been able to hang at right tackle. I just think we need a reliable backup tackle. We got away with last year being completely healthy at tackle, which just does not happen. But why I aimed for right tackle was because Decker obviously is left tackle, and I don't think he's going to want to move to right tackle. So even if there's an injury there, I don't know if he's going to move. And Penny Sewell can play both spots. I need a backup right tackle. And to me, that's Billy Turner in this sense. I don't think he's the mauler necessarily that maybe the Lions would like, a little bit more of a stocky build, but athletically he can handle his own as a pass protector, and that's what I was aiming for, is just give me a reliable pass protector. And then finally, we have 3 more deals to go through. Now, these are all re-signings. I'm going to throw them up all at once here. The big deal that I gave out first, DJ Chark. He is projected $11.5 million, or it was like $11.6 million by Spotrac. So I had to go to that number, $11.5 million, if I was going to do it, which I did. He was one of the deals that I messed around a little bit with. Now, there's going to be guys like Robert Woods just got cut. He'll be an intriguing option if the Lions don't bring him back. That you could go after a guy like Robert Woods. I'm all over that. But with DJ Chark, I did a full video on him, so I'm not going to talk about him too much specifically. What I did with his deals, I backloaded a little bit. I gave him a 3-year extension. I backloaded it a tad. I also included his void years that were thrown on there, where if he had an extension, they could spread out. So I threw his void years on. That includes that. So it's not just simply a 3-year, $11.5 million deal per season. So it's not just that. I also included the void year money. So it's more like a 3-year, $38-39 million deal. So with that, I paid him a little bit. I backloaded it because I expect the salary cap to continue to rise, which will mean he'll fall into that receiver market of making it more reasonable. But I just think the impact that he had last season is massive. And it also, I just want to have DJ Chark back. He's a lion. He is just a lion to me. His personality is outstanding. I love the way that he plays. Obviously, he brings to you a completely different element. And I think he's that guy where if you came into a playoff game and said, hey, my number 2 needs to beat your number 2, DJ Chark I'm going to believe that he's going to win that battle more often than not. And his chemistry, I think, is just beginning with Jared Goff. So I'm bringing him back. Now, outside of that, we have Josh Woods really quickly, who I'm giving a slight raise to from this past season. He's been linebacker depth. We've seen him in the past, like against teams like the Denver Broncos, where he's helped us a little bit. But while he brings that and he continues to get better there, I think mainly for special teams like CJ Moore. He is one of the better special teamers out there, and without having Chris Board back, as you see, I wanted to make sure that I still had a linebacker that brought some of that value on different units. So I brought back Josh Woods, and then also Alex Anzalone. I love me some Duracell. You knew I was bringing this dude back. I think he's starting capable for sure, and like we saw last year, he had his career season, so I'm assuming he's going to draw some more interest. Even though he's another guy that I believe again said he would be willing to take less. So I may have overshot here with his cap number because he only was getting $2.25 million last year. I went to $3.75. I really jumped it up. But with that being said, this is a clutch player that what gets so underrated about him is he can play both Mike and Will, meaning that you can literally put any linebacker aside him. That's what's so beneficial. If I have Malcolm Rodriguez out there, I have to be understanding of who I put next to him, because if I put a guy with the same build type, now we have limitations on the field. He can do everything as a linebacker, so I could put a Will out there with him, I could put a Mike, I could put him with Barnes, I could put him with Malcolm, I could put him with a new guy, because he's versatile. The hip fluidity and ability to cover running backs and tight ends, reasonable enough, dropping his own coverage. He's a smart player that communicates and sets everything up defensively. I would like if he was a little bit better of a blitzer, but he's also willing to stick his nose in. He's not an elite linebacker, but he's I really like him. I think he's productive to winning. I think he's a plus linebacker, and on top of that, he also is clutch. He makes some big-time clutch plays for us. So I'm bringing Duracell back for sure. Maybe just until we figure out, hey, who's the next guy. But I'm bringing him back for sure. And you also have to keep in mind with that is that I think when you look at this linebacker group, as we'll hit on here, when you head into the needs based on all these moves I just showed you, as Brad Holmes said at the end of the season, he felt like linebacker became a strength. I honestly can see what he's talking about there, meaning they found a role for Derek Barnes. Now, Derek Barnes was drafted to be a Mike. He could be the future Mike linebacker for the Lions, but I would love to have Alex Anzalone for another season until we really feel good about that with Barnes, because he's the guy with the length, the explosiveness, the pop, the straight line speed to really stack and shed. But I still want to see a little bit more there. So Alex Anzalone still gives me that buffer while also playing really well, and I think it's fine to give him a multi-year deal too. He's a starting caliber linebacker, and I'm going to keep him for that. But meanwhile, you also have Malcolm Rodriguez, who is your will linebacker. Even though he can stack and shed, which is wild for a guy his size, and that's what makes him so awesome. He's limited in certain areas, but that's what he is. So I think eventually the starting unit could be Derek Barnes and Malcolm Rodriguez. But I would love to have Alex Anzalone as kind of that buffer that can do both. Plus, our linebacker position is a little bit light with the free agency that we have, and losing a guy like Chris Board. So with that, those are the moves that I made in free agency. Those are the signings that we made. Now we head to the draft, okay? So after this, what are we thinking? Okay, what are our needs here? Filled a lot of positions in terms of that would be holes, which give me some flexibility in the draft, which I always like to do that. I think I did that pretty much across the board, gave out a lot of prove-it deals, but still with that, it remains that the same kind of needs that I felt like coming into the offseason or before I even did this free agency are the same needs, because we need starting caliber players at certain spots. I think we still need a 3-tech. I would love to leave flexibility for Levi to potentially burst onto the scene, and that's why I ultimately decided not to sign a guy like David Onyemata, because I think Levi, if I'm going to give him a chance, and look, By the way, on Levi, I went back and rewatched some of his Washington stuff. That dude has so much potential. He, for a guy that's 295, has one of the... He's like super thick in the lower body, meaning like, hey, pause, but no, this dude can handle the run. Like, he's so explosive, and the way he pops off one knee is crazy. Like, I can see why the Lions were super hyped about him, and it's like Brad said, length and quickness, meaning he has pass rush upside. This dude has a lot of upside. I don't want to give up on him. I know he has his injury, but in that, while don't want to give up on him, I have to make sure that I have other guys, because if it doesn't work out this year, I can't just be like, oh, we didn't have him, that's a problem. I don't want to be reaching and trying to just figure it out last second. So that's why I bring in the Ridgeway, and you'll see what I do in the draft here. Cornerback is still in need. I bring in David Long, but that does not mean I'm good there. I still came in this offseason believing I need a starting cornerback, and I didn't hit that in free agency, so now we have to look to the draft. So those are two of my biggest ones there, and aside that, you'll see how I look to address this thing. So with that, I found the Brad Holmes approach. Just to caution you before we hit this, draft the players that I love, and these will always change, but I didn't want to focus as much on needs as I kind of focused on needs, but at the same time, I just wanted guys that I love, and I'm like, I'm just going to make this work. So let's do it. Let's take a look at the draft. So here we go. I don't want to give this away, so I'm trying to block. You guys may know who I just drafted here. But here we go, man. Mock draft tied along with that mock free agency. And with the first pick for the Lions, with the sixth pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select. Now, this one was difficult, because I really do feel like there's a lot of options at 6'4". I think there's a lot of positions we can go, and I think trade backs are in it. As I said, I'm not going to be afraid to trade. I'm going to move the board, and you will see that. But this is a spot where I think trade backs in play. I think corners in play. I think defensive tackles in play. I think edge rushers in play. I think a lot of things are in play here. Some people say quarterback, even though I don't agree with that. But wide receiver, I mean, hey, maybe you take Quentin Johnston, and you're just like, hey, Quentin Johnston and Jamal. I don't know. Point is, this is where I'm going for my first one. He is my favorite corner right now, even though I really like a lot of these guys. And that is Christian Gonzalez, cornerback, Oregon. Now, you guys can check out my full video on him, so I won't spend too much time, but this is a player that I wish he made more plays on the football. I wish he just finished a play more often. I don't think he brings me that Devin Witherspoon kind of mentality, and I don't even know if Witherspoon's available because he always goes first. But with that being said, Christian Gonzalez, man, his movement skill, he is so darn clean as a press cornerback. He can play in a lot of different situations. He has ball skills, like he has really clean hands. I think he gets his hands on the football a lot. He just needs to finish beyond that. He's not a dominant run defender, right? He's not a guy that's necessarily the tone setter there, but I think he's just such a fluid and smooth cornerback. He has cornerback one upside, his size, his athleticism, his movement skills, his fluidity. It's incredible, man. The quick feet that he shows off the line for a guy his size is unreal. I love me some Christian Gonzalez. PFF was hating, give me the B+. I don't know, a lot of y'all would probably agree with that, though. So I'm taking Gonzalez. I'm shoring up that corner position immediately, and now I have Okudah, Gonzalez, David Long, Will Harris, and we'll continue from there. Here we go. With the second Lions pick, we got ourselves a trade. Man. So what I did here, as you can see, I traded up. I gave up pick 18, pick 81, and pick 194. In return from New England, I received their 14th pick in the draft, and also their 2 fourth-round picks in this year's draft. So basically, it wasn't a lot to give up. It really wasn't. It gave me a B-. It wasn't a lot to give up. I think a big reason for that is New England really didn't have anybody to take at this spot because of who was available. And on top of that, it was like, you're only moving 4 spots. They didn't really have anybody to take anyway, so I don't think they were losing out on anybody. And you know New England loves to trade back. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Now, I didn't come in with a plan. I came in saying, look, I want guys I love. And there's a lot of guys that I like in this draft. But as I'm sitting there and the way the board is unfolding, and I'm seeing him fall, I got to make it happen. I got to make the call. I made the call. I didn't want to give up too much. I didn't want to overdo it because I have a lot of options at 18 that I like. A lot of guys that I like at 18. And even though this one, like if you ask me which one probably makes the most sense, it's not this draft pick. For the first time around, I just wanted to take guys that I love, and that's what I did. It's a little bit of a risk, but I take Kalijah Kancey, defensive tackle, Pittsburgh. I know. Look, you're probably like, hey, that's a risk, man. It is a risk. Here's the reason. A guy like Brian Bresee, who may have already been gone, if you ask me which one probably makes more sense if I was predicting in just terms of what makes sense, I'd probably say he does. Because he's got the size, he's got the explosiveness, he can hold his ground at the point of attack way easier just naturally. Like, he also brings flexibility where I could probably put that guy as a 5-tech. Like, he just makes more sense to me. But Kalijah Kancey And I don't want to say he's Aaron Donald because he's not. I don't believe he's Aaron Donald. Here's the thing with Donald. And I tried to go look at Aaron Donald back when he was at Pitt. Aaron Donald, and this is why I'm excited for Levi, and I still believe in him. Aaron Donald had like the weird, thick lower body for a guy that was 290 something coming out, or 280 coming out. But he was so bulked up in the lower body, and he was so low to the ground, he looked like a rock. And it was like, that guy's going to be a problem because he's a freak of nature. Like, he's not just crazy explosive, athletic, twitchy, smooth, fluid, powerful. His lower body is jacked up. So even though he's going to look undersized every time someone measures him, he's going to be able to hold his ground. Kalijah Kancey isn't built like that. He's a little bit more linear in his build, but he's also, again, like Aaron Donald, a little bit undersized for the defense tackle position, but I love watching dude play. He is so impactful. I just love it. And I think he plays beyond his strength. I think he's going to be forced to work a little overtime, which I don't love. You're going to have to allow him to be a penetrator. If you're going to ask him to sit there, stack, and shed, he's going to have issues at times. Now, one-on-one blocks, he's going to play behind the line of scrimmage. He is going to work overtime, play behind the line of scrimmage, drive you back. But if you're asking him to hold his ground against double teams, you're going to have some issues just naturally. But I love the way that he plays it. He keeps his pad level low. He plays with outstanding explosiveness. He has one of the best first steps from a defensive tackle in this class, if not the best first step. And man, he is so active with his hands. I plan to do a video on this guy soon because while I love his balance, ability to change direction, I think some of that is because of how low to the ground he is. There also is strictly limits to his game, and you'll see just the natural drive back ability isn't there. The walk back ability just isn't necessarily there. So he's more of the quick wins, and then he's there and he's a problem, work through stunts, finding creases, slants, rather than a guy that's going to get late wins consistently unless the quarterback looks to take off and he can break off his block and make the play. He's so slippery. He finds creases. I just think even if he's not completely 3 down immediately and maybe he eventually gets there, the impact that you're getting of this player, it could be game-changing completely for this defensive front. So I just went with it. I went for it. I'm like, you know what? I'm throwing my eggs. I'm going for it. I'm taking Kalijah Kancey because we're going to have fun with this first mock draft. My biggest concern is his frame. If he had a bigger frame to fill out, I would be less worried about his ability to hang in the trenches. If he had a little bit of a bigger frame, it's not the same as, like, Levi, you could tell he's got, like, this dude can get a lot stronger. Kalijah Kancey looks a little bit more tapped out, and that to me is my biggest concern, but I think you're getting an absolute dog, and I'm willing to take that risk in my first offseason. Why? Well, because, there's nothing that, I'm not get fired for this. I mean, But anyway, that's where I'm going with it. All right, let's continue. We got 2 defensive players at the 2 biggest needs immediately. I'm feeling really good at this point. Defense was a need. It was 32nd last year, even though, in saying that, it was a lot better when Jacobs returned. I just added a couple dogs in my opinion. Let's move on. So we traded up. The draft picks have changed. And with the next pick, our second-round pick, the Detroit Lions select, at pick number 48, Sidney Brown, safety, Illinois. Now, I know what you're thinking. You just drafted a safety. Don't leave yet. Trust me. I thought it was crazy. Look, PFF gave me a C-. They're hating. But I thought it was crazy when I initially considered this idea. I've went a lot of different ways with this pick. Sidney Brown, I think, actually makes sense. Here's why. And I feel like I'm doing it a little earlier than I would like. I would like to have this wait. And if I get this in round 3, now that's money. I have to go earlier because, again, the benefit that I have that the Lions won't have is, well, they're going to do their best to set it up. But I see where PFF ranks guys. So if they rank a guy near the spot, I know he's not going to just magically slip around. It just won't happen because they ranked him at a certain spot. So I have to play the board. So even though the order of where I get players, I may not always love it, what's important is getting the players that I love and making the board work. And because I have that advantage of being able to see it, I can work around it. So while this looks high, what I like is I think Sidney Brown, who obviously was teammates with Kirby, he reminds me, here's my player comp for the Lions, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think I bring in Sidney Brown as a weapon in the back end that needs to get better, but as a guy that can start at slot. And as much nickel, that's basically your main package now, I view him as my starting nickel cornerback coming in day 1. Now look, I'm going to have to continue to do more research on Sidney Brown, okay, because I've only watched him play like 3 or 4 games, and also the Senior Bowl. He dominated at the Senior Bowl, rocked up. He's a monster. He's willing to stick his nose in, and I think that frame is awesome for the slot position because we talked about Jerry moving to slot, Aaron Glenn liking some of those more physical guys, and Jerry could, in this case, this probably kind of kicks him out of that spot, but We talked about things like that, getting a more physical cornerback. This guy, Cindy Brown, as physical as he is, he can match up with slots. He is so smart. He understands his limitation, but he slows the game down when he plays. All right, that's what I see. Like, he slows it down for himself. He'll play through the hands against a bigger receiver. He has some limitations against tight ends, but that's why he's a nickel, because he's going to get a lot of slot receiver work for me. And I'm going to take that. He's going to be physical against the run. He's going to be able to blitz. I'm taking a reach on this one, but I'm getting a versatile piece that is crazy athletic and also rocked up and also very smart that I can pair with Kirby, also Tracy Walker, and Iffy, who is my tight end matcher. This is not my tight end matchup guy. Even though he can be, he's undersized. That's Iffy. I just add another weapon to that back end, and look, just get players you love. I'm not trying to just pigeonhole, I have to go get this need, so I got to do this. I want to get players I love, and that's exactly what Cindy Brown represents here. Continuing on with my second round pick, which I did maintain through that trade, taking Joe Tippmann, guard, Wisconsin, even though he's listed as a center, mainly because he played center at Wisconsin. That's why he's listed as a center. Okay, so this one is a little bit of it's not a direct, like, oh, we know he's going to play guard, but what I like about him is I think there's a lot of flexibility. First, quick feet. It mainly shows off when he works up to the second level. His ability to get to the second level, pick up zone blocks, also pulls an offensive lineman. He is one of the better athletes from an offensive lineman that you will find. I know Lions love athletes at offensive line, and that's kind of what you need. Like, people, I think a lot of times you get stuck in thinking that, oh, I just need this big rock there. Like, no, you got to have athletes, especially in today's NFL. You have to have athletes. Like, Sewell is so ridiculous of an athlete. Decker isn't. If you guys ever just focus on Decker, he's not long. He's not crazy powerful. He is so darn smooth and fluid and athletic that he can hold down a pass protector at left tackle. You need athletes, and I think that's what this is. Obviously, I don't love his strength and his mass, but at the same time, he is one of the best pullers from the center position. Like, a lot of teams don't pull their center. They do it all the time. Ability to get second level, maintain contact at the second level. I think his hands are inconsistent right now, and that needs to be figured out and cleaned up. Plays a little bit high cut. He kind of gets over his toes. You'll see him fall down at times getting into blocks. That can't happen. That needs to be cleaned up. But it's the ability to stay connected at the second level. His hands just get way too wide right now, but I love how he works to reset. He always works to reset, always works to attack underneath the pads. If he can continue to be more consistent at sitting himself down and not getting over his toes and just getting under the pads that way, because he has the mirrors match skills, I think it'll make him a lot more fluid of an offensive lineman. So this is part of the reason that I signed a guard, because it may not be immediate, but at the same time, it could be. And now you have, again, your replacement for Big V in this sense of Tippmann. And also, I think it kind of plays into, similarly his build, into a lot of what the Rams kind of had there. When you look at what the Rams did at guard, the Austin Blythes, and obviously they had some flexibility there, but a lot of the offensive linemen that they brought in had this similar type of build to what Joe Tippmann kind of brings, right? Now, they did a lot more zone running, Lions do more power, but because of his athleticism to work as a pulling offensive lineman, I'm willing to take that bet on him at this point in time. So for now, Joe Tippmann, offensive lineman. Now, here's where things get kind of wild, because here's where I decided to trade. Now, PFF is just going to give you away who I traded up for, but that's fine. I'm just going to show you right now. They gave me an A for this one. They gave me a C for the trade. All right, PFF, I see how it is. So this is another one of those situations where, because you guys know I'm not like, I think we need a linebacker round one or something like that. I'm not in that boat, and I've watched a lot of the line. Trust me, I've watched so many darn prospects to this point where a lot of these linebackers that I've looked at, the difference between them and Drew Sanders, obviously the fact that he's 6'5", 225, and that's the difference. But I think the big difference for me is I think there's legit flexibility here. And because it was round 3, so I'm sitting there, I had pick 107, which came from me in the New England Patriots trade. And because Drew Sanders was still available and understanding their board, I decided I want to move up and go get him. I think he fills a couple of roles immediately for the Lions. First off, special teams. He's going to be an impact special teams player immediately. His play speed, his toughness also translates really well. Also on top of that, he is going to potentially be able to fill the role that Chris Boyd, his main role that he had with Seth, which was his ability to match up on running backs and tight ends. His ability to just get out there on third down and do that, I think, is something that he could, if not immediately, eventually replace. Of his straight line speed, there is some fluidity within his movement skills, even though it's not elite. I think some of that's because he's a little bit taller. I think he'll be able to bring some of that. So those are two things that I think he can knock out. On top of that, for a guy at his build, a lot of guys you'll see, they are clearly just dip around offensive lineman. I wanted a guy that was willing to take on blocks, and he's not your, typical between the tackles 240 pounds lineman, and he's not Malcolm Rodriguez at all, but what he is he's willing to take on blocks more so than I really anticipated. He was very willing to take on blocks, put his head in there, and at the same time, he is a very good pass rusher. This is the trait that separates him at this point in the draft that I wanted to go after. it's a league which is a passing league, and I thought, man, if I can get a guy that's dynamic, because I like our backers, Derek Barnes, Malcolm, I like their ability to stop the run. If I can get a dynamic athlete that's a pass rusher in Drew Sanders, I'm going to go for it, because go for it. Ole Miss was one of my favorite games I watched him. I thought he looked so clean in that game. But he is like legitimately a pass rusher. Like, you know, sometimes you project and you're like, well, he's kind of fast and he could probably dip a little bit. Like, no, this guy's a legitimate pass rusher. He came in with a plan. Even some of the higher guys that get, you know, praise and credit for, oh, they can pass rush. This guy legitimately, to me, from linebackers I've seen that are off-ball backers, looked like the best pass rusher out of any of them to this point. And that is his stop and start, changes directions, the crease ability that he's able to find, his hands he utilizes well. Now, yes, you can kind of shut down his reps when you anchor down as an offensive lineman, as you should. He's like 80 pounds, 90 pounds lighter than you are. But the consistency of which he wins as a pass rusher is unreal. He had over 30 pressures. His numbers were incredible. I don't want to pigeonhole him to that, but I think there's flexibility. If you allow him to move and find different spots and figure it out, because he's not going to be thrown in, you have to play right now for me. If you kind of simplify him early and say, we're going to rush you when you're out there. But I think there's an early third down impact for him, which is big time, and a special teams role. And hopefully eventually he can develop himself to being a more of a early down ability to play between the tackles type of guy. But to me, this was just an overall playmaker defensively that I'm going for here with Drew Sanders. I'll have more of my full strengths and weaknesses on DoseOfDion.com on this player eventually. One of the biggest knocks, of course, is his tackling. Like, he has some flash big-time tackles, but my goodness, this guy just leaves his feet and just goes. Like, he misses way too many tackles right now. So you're not getting a completely dialed-in, smooth draft pick that's just like he's there. Like, Malcolm Rodriguez was ready when he came out. This player is a little bit not that. But with that being said, that pass rush ability just has me excited. I love the way that this guy played, and his closing speed is also something that has to be mentioned. He can close on the quarterback, which for a lot of the quarterbacks now that can move, he can close on those guys. Now, I don't love that he does play on his toes, but his immediate change of direction twitch is not ideal, and I think a lot of that is just his size, but I'm willing to take a chance here on a guy that I think is just a dynamic pass rusher. Drew Sanders, Arkansas, boom. This trade, as you can see, I gave up 154, 183, and a future 7th round pick. I didn't want to give up future picks. I did not, but I had to, just to make it happen. I had to spice up the deal a little bit with the Giants. Gave him a future 7th. Okay, I know. Hey, destroy me. Oh, you gave him a 7th round pick. I'm sorry. I did, okay? But look what I got in return. I got pick 128. So I still got a pick in this round from the Giants. I love that. Here we go. Now my draft picks are very strange, okay? If you haven't realized, my draft picks are very strange at this point. I believe I have 2 draft picks remaining. And at pick number 117, 17 picks later, I go right back to the defensive line. And again, I told y'all what I'm doing. I'm getting players I love. I'm not pigeonholing myself and just being like, well, I haven't got the tight end yet. Let me go get a tight end. No, I'm not forcing draft picks. I haven't got the quarterback yet. Let me go. I'm not forcing draft picks. Zach Pickens, defensive tackle, South Carolina. They gave me a B+. Appreciate it. Hey, look, they gave me some good grades for my draft picks, though. Okay, y'all see that? I love me some Zach Pickens. And if it was Senior Bowl, then it was Senior Bowl. First thing, man, he was dominant at the Senior Bowl. And it was like, where was this guy at South Carolina? Why was he so inconsistent? He needs to get better at utilizing his hands. That is for sure. He needs a more consistent pass rush plan. That is for sure. But I think there's also versatility here, where because of his stout build, he has very powerful thighs, right? He has some drive ability, some drive back ability to walk back offensive linemen. But on top of that, I think it also gives him some girth where you could sit in there and potentially slide over to a 2-eye technique and rush that way for you and play the run for you. Not great against duo blocks and double team blocks at this point. I think that can be improved upon. I think there's reason to believe that they can be improved upon. With that being said, though, what I really like is that he changes his play style up. And when you see he knows it's a pass down, he can pin his ears back, he looks like a completely different athlete than any other time, which is great. He flashes some great reps off the line of scrimmage. He has that pop that allows him to play behind the line. We want guys that can attack and react, play behind the line of scrimmage, kind of set the tone, play on the heels, and I think that's what you're getting here again. Needs to also improve his ability to lock out and finish, and I think that ties in with his hands, which I think are just kind of very inconsistent right now. But if his hands get better, allowing him to disengage and finish more plays, there's a lot of plays that he just left on the table because he didn't finish. And I also need him to reset his weight more consistently. Probably the biggest concern that I have outside of that, within being able to improve, is the fact that he finds himself on the ground too often working upfield. Probably my biggest concern with him. He gets a little bit linear, a little bit straight, and it's not always his game. So you see him kind of fall down a few times, and I don't love that. But with that being said, though, Zach Pickens here, I honestly think he could play nose tackle, honestly, in certain situations, especially on 3rd third down, even though I don't think he'll be a third down player because of the weapons that we have now. But I think he could actually slide to both defensive tackle positions for you, and he's just a player that I really like. Go watch him in the Senior Bowl. He's just popping guys off the line. Boom, boom, just popping guys in their chest, working behind, playing the run super well. I'm going with Pickens at 117, which means that I have one draft pick left. Yes, I know. Yeah, you got no late round picks. I moved the board. I moved it all over the place. Actually, the draft price basically came out the same. It was about $14 million for the draft class, what is projected. So I do have the cap space. So with the final draft pick at 128, with the running back. I could have went a lot of different ways with this draft pick. I didn't want to force a quarterback pick just to make a quarterback pick to say I took a quarterback, but I decided to go running back at this point. And running back is one of those spots where I feel like you could, after the draft, possibly grab a running back. But Keaton Mitchell is a guy I'm very intrigued by. I'm not sure if I love this one or not. I'm not sure if a couple weeks from now I'll still be on board with taking this guy at this spot. But from what I've seen so far, he's definitely undersized, 5'9", 185. But at the same time, my biggest reason for drafting a running back and my reason for it was I don't want to be in the situation where last year, because if you just look at when were we at our when did we struggle? We were in situations last year where we felt like on passing downs, or we felt like without Swift, we didn't have our dynamic weapon, and we were a different offense. We didn't have a third down threat. Justin Jackson is not really a big third down threat. Jamal can catch the ball, he can pass protect, but he's not a big receiving back out of the backfield. He's not a guy that's going to take a draw and take off with it. So when we didn't have Swift, that was what we were lacking. And I don't know if we have anybody on the roster that's going to necessarily bring that outside of Swift. So this isn't a replace DeAndre Swift necessarily draft pick. But it could be. It's not necessarily, though. However, it's a guy that when that scenario pops up, because it was my last pick of the 4th round, I want to have an option. I think Keaton Mitchell is that. Plus, there is flexibility where he could line up at receiver because he's naturally able to do that. He's a gliding running back. That's what he looks like to me, man. He is slippery as heck. His contact balance is probably a little underrated just because he is so darn slippery. He had 31 runs of 15-plus yards, which led college football this past season. He's got very reliable hands, willingness in pass protection, even though his size is going to give him some issues, so that's not really where he's at his best. Give him a draw, throw him some screens, line him up as a receiver, use him as a scat back. That's basically what he is here. That's kind of what I'm going for. It's a risk pick. I get it. It's a very risky pick, but I just feel like last year when we didn't have that, you could see it, and the Lions didn't have another option to turn to. And it's hard to find it during the year because teams don't want to give that up. Teams don't want to give up that guy, and I just feel like he's the guy that could occasionally give you that flash play of, oh, he made something happen. And that's why I looked at the Gaskins, even though I don't feel like Gaskin has the home run ability. Travis Homer was quiet last year, and he has some fumble issues as well, but he is a guy that doesn't have that home run ability. He gives me home run ability, and he also gives me some of that dynamic playmaking ability that I didn't have when I lost Swift. So that's why I made that decision. I could have went a lot of ways with that pick. Here are a couple of UDFA targets just according to the PFF mock draft simulator that I would say go after, or not go after, but you could look at. First off, Gindoff, who is a tight end out of North Dakota State. Bigger tight end, really has no receiving production whatsoever. He's like 270 pounds, but my goodness, this guy is a mean mauler, right? He is a line. He's like a Garrett. He kind of gives me Garrett Griffin vibes, honestly, in a sense. Jordan Perryman. I love me some Jordan Perryman. I'm willing to bet on him. He just isn't even on a simulator. I probably would have drafted him if he was. He's not. I don't know why. I think he's a late-round pick. I'm betting on this guy. The improvements and strides that he took with Washington after transferring out with his build. I'm a very big fan of Jordan Perryman. He could be the next one of those kind of Washington corners that comes out. And I honestly think if he would have just had more time with Washington, he would be a legitimate draft pick. He just didn't have that. Christopher Brooks. I've touched on him a few times, and I'm going to make it clear now. He's not on there. I don't know if he's going to get drafted. I think he's a late round pick. I have him graded out as a draft pick. With that being said, though, Chris Brooks is one of my favorite. He is literally baby Jamal, just with a different personality. A lot more to himself, but at the same time, big back, great pass protector, soft hands, and my goodness, you want to talk about run through contact. There is like no one else. There is no one else. So he transferred from Cal, and he has one career fumble. He is literally baby Jamal Williams. I love me some Christopher Brooks. I would absolutely make that a priority. Evan Hall as well, running back out of Northwestern. I think he's a little bit limited in terms of dynamic athleticism. He's a little bit undersized as well, but he has pretty reliable hands. He's willing to sit in and pass protect, kind of throw his head at it, and at the same time, he is kind of a zone type of back. With that being said, though, he's not a big-time change of pace back necessarily, and at the same time, he's not really someone that has a second gear. There's really not much of a change of speed. He kind of just moves the same way the entire time. And also, MJ J. Anderson, the edge out of Iowa State. Not really sure if he's an edge necessarily. He's 275. He's a teammate, of course, of, as we know, Will McDonald IV. But he's a guy that really made a lot of plays against the run. I thought he was more of a dominant run defender than any bit of a pass rusher. Still within that defense, I thought they were super limited. Even Will McDonald, they played him like 4-eye techniques all the time, and it was like, that's not what he is. So he actually may be more of that than McDonald. McDonald's a stand-up rusher, but that guy has that flexibility to potentially be kind of like that John Kaminsky, and maybe he could possibly learn behind those guys and find himself into the mix. So those are just 5 targets just came to mind that I thought to throw in there. And this is kind of an idea of what a 53 could look like, even though I don't even think this is 53 players. Just an idea. Quarterback, Goff, Sudfeld. There wasn't a late quarterback. I could have just drafted Clayton Tune, and he's probably the one that I liked the most at the end of the draft, but none of the other guys I really liked. I watched them all, and I think Clayton Tune was probably the one I liked the most. With that being said, though, still some questions with decision-making, leaning back when he throws it. I didn't want to just take quarterback to do it, so I have the other one. We can either go to UDFA, we can grab another free agent. Running back, as you're going to see, Swift, Jamal, Craig Reynolds. Now we have Mitchell, so we have 2 running backs under contract next season between Jamal and Mitchell. You could end up possibly running with those guys. Those are the guys that I mentioned as well, Brooks and Hall, Kabinda, and Justin Jackson. I'm not sure why I have him in parentheses, but I do here. I guess the biggest thing with Justin Jackson is he actually may not make the team. I guess in fairness, right? Because I did the draft afterwards, so now I'm looking at Justin Jackson's could get cut. He could get cut. Mitchell could actually potentially return kicks. So Jackson actually could end up getting cut in this scenario. So I guess I should have pointed that out. Tight end, I'm going with Shane Zylstra, James Mitchell, and Drew Sample. With that said, that it means that, there would be no Brock Wright, but I think that's a great competition spot for all of those guys. Mitchell really is the only lock. And then receiver, I didn't touch it at all. Reynolds, St. Brown, Chark, J-Mo, and Raymond. I just wanted to get Chark back, and that was it. We're going to have to bring in another receiver for at least competition, even if we only keep 5. I think Ronnie Bell would have been a really nice pick there late. I don't have him as a draftable guy, but as a late pick, maybe. With that said, though, you can find that as a UDFA or as a free agent. I just didn't want to waste your time with that because those are the 5 that I'm rocking with anyway. O-line, Decker, Jackson, Ragnow, Pittman at right guard, the rookie, Sewell. Backups will be Craven, Urbig, Price, and then Eze. And I would love to see a scenario where Eze beats out Price and we roll that way, because I don't want to roll with Price necessarily if I don't have to. I would love to be able to roll with the young guy that is on his UDFA deal that has another year left. I'd love to be able to do that. So hopefully he beats him out for that role. And you know what? Maybe if there's a little dead cap, I eat the dead cap. But if not, I need to make sure that I have a backup tackle. And I've been on that for a while. Y'all know. D lineman, I'm keeping Levi in the mix. I could have went and grabbed the big time, David Onyemata, and I thought about it. But I think what that does is it pretty much just closes the book. Because if I go get Onyemata and then I draft a DT, I think it closes the books on Levi, and I don't want to do that. I don't know where he's at health-wise. Lions know better. They could, but I'm believing in this guy. I still got belief in him. I still got hope for him, so I didn't want to close the book, but I also want to make sure that I have options if he's not healthy. So Ali McNeil is going to start as my nose, of course, and he's probably going to start next to Kalijah Kancey. If he's not completely ready, yes, Pickens can mix in there as well as Hassan Ridgeway, but I really wanted to revamp that because the biggest thing with this defensive line is if we can find a 3-tech, I think the defensive line is one of the best in football. I love Isaiah Buggs. I love Benito Jones. I'm willing to bring them back. I just wanted to give you guys different names for this mock offseason instead of just re-signing everybody. And on top of that, I also think that Ridgeway and Pickens can be a little bit more of the play behind the line of scrimmage guys than Isaiah Buggs. And Benito Jones is pretty explosive, so in fairness to him, but he's just, like 330 pounds. And then I also have Pascal and Kaminsky as kind of the 5-tech within there. At edge, I actually didn't really touch it. Houston, Hutchinson, Julian, and Charles Harris. One guy I considered was possibly trying to give a prove-it deal to a Chase Winovich out of Michigan, who is probably going to be a super cheap deal. He's just athletically pretty darn limited, so I could see that. I could see trying to throw a prove-it deal out here, or maybe going to sign someone else. This is probably the biggest issue that I had is that I didn't address this again. I would have loved to address this. I would love to hit it as a UDFA. It's probably the biggest thing that I don't like about this. And when I got to that spot in the draft, instead of taking the running back, I could have went edge. There wasn't an edge that I loved enough to do it with. I felt like I would have just been taking it to take it. And I think the running back I really liked, so I went that direction. But I think the biggest benefit is Sanders can actually get up on the edge and rush the passer. So that's the thing that cannot be forgotten here is he's listed as an off-ball linebacker. He's not going to play a ton as an off-ball. I mean, he could, but he may not. So if he doesn't, I can put him on the edge and let him rush the quarterback. And again, Pascal and Kaminsky gives me flexibility to put those big ends out there as well. So I think next year we'll probably be drafting an edge. And again, I think this year he could have done it. I could have went Murphy, with my first pick in the draft. I could have done some different things. There just wasn't one when I got to my running back pick that I loved, or honestly the Zach Pickens pick that I loved at that point. And I went through a lot of those guys, so I just kind of sat where I was. I do like the kid out of App State, though. Very undersized, but I like him. I'm intrigued by that guy. He's He's twitchy, man. Cornerback, Okudah, Gonzalez, Jacobs, Will Harris, and then we also have David Long. Chase Lucas is going to have to battle it out with a guy like David Long. Here's my thing. I said in the cornerback video that I believe Chase Lucas could start at slot this year, and I still do. But the reason I did this for this draft is, first off, I think that a guy like Brown could be game-changing. But two, I did this because the Lions never really gave Lucas a shot at slot last year, and they could have. They could have. That's not to say that he can't be this year. I'm just saying they didn't. So I believe Lucas could start, and maybe you find a way, an exception to keep him along on the roster. But in this case, because I landed Sidney Brown, I don't know if he's going to make the team. Finally, we have Walker, Joseph, Iffy, Brown, and Moore. Moore is actually very impactful here because he is now basically my fourth safety, even though Brown can play safety. So if he's not playing slot, I can put him at safety. With that said, though, that's not my vision for the guy. So I listed him as safety, but that's not my vision for the player. With that being said, I think Iffy basically just replaces Deshaun Elliott in that sense. And again, Brown gives you that physicality that you may be lacking there. And then finally, we have Eddie as a kicker, Dalian Fox. And then again, if Moody is a UDFA, you know I'm making that happen. But I'm assuming he's going to get drafted. Even though PFF says he's going to be undrafted, he's going to get drafted. So there you go. Mock Offseason 1.0. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know this was super long. I'm going to try to just end this thing here because I don't want to make this any longer for you guys. Thank you, Pride, for watching. Can you see Kabinda? Come on, Kabinda. And I'm out.